technically, did we win or lose Brandywine? I mean, it's a loss. Washington lost again, and what you might be thinking is, why doesn't that loss become, why don't we begin to, why doesn't the war get worse? Because something better happens at the same time. What happens at Brandywine is the American Army actually fought better. The American Army literally rotates, and did we do this yesterday?
No, we didn't.
So let's just make sure everybody's clear. The Battle of Brandywine is the battle here between Washington and Clinton. Everybody okay? Militarily, when you try to sort of attack a person, it's called a flank. What happened is the English are going to flank. They're going to try to move like this. That way you attack from two sides. Most commonly, when someone tries to move to your side, the simplest thing to do is you rotate the same way. Everybody see where they are. This would be Washington. This would be Clinton. What happens is they go like this, and then Washington does this. The armies literally flank, kind of like, what would that be? 180 degrees? Ladies and gentlemen, the mistake at Brandywine is not that the army is captured, so I want to be clear. George Washington is not defeated or captured. He moves out of position, and the British literally walk in. At the Battle of Brandywine, the British capture Philadelphia. So if we go back to what you were asking, Clinton basically stays here. He basically feels, he's captured. That is where the Congress was. They believe with, New York is under control, Philadelphia is under control. They believe that they are kind of going to force the counties to their knees. The one item we did not say is after Philadelphia falls, this is something you've all heard of, and where is the problem? You hear things and you don't put them into context. Because of this defeat, remember we talked about the winter quarters. Winter is dangerous. George Washington, wanting to show support to Philadelphia, not wanting to abandon what had become the capital, George, instead of going to a different city, he spent the entire winter of 77, 78 living in the countryside. They literally camped like on farm fields. They literally spent the winter training. That is Valley Forge. So if you've ever heard the name Valley Forge, and folks, that's a very famous name, Valley Forge is kind of the byproduct of the Battle of Brandywine. What is kind of the reference is George Washington is telling the people of Philadelphia, I have not abandoned you. For George Washington's point of view, what is the benefit? His army, cushy town, they didn't spend the winter, relaxing. They spent the entire winter at Valley Forge training, marching, learning maneuvers. They even got a German soldier named von Steuben who began to teach them military tactics. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please go over here to Laguerre? We're at Fort Oswego. Laguerre. Laguerre is coming across the frontier. Remember, everybody is supposed to meet up at Albany. And ladies and gentlemen, what we want to mention about Laguerre is this is going to be kind of, how do you summarize? Folks, the biggest thing I'm trying to emphasize, why do we talk about Clinton and Brandywine? We are noticing a problem. Remember in the French and Indian War when the British couldn't adjust to the Indians? The English are very traditional. They do the same thing over and over and over, and they do it very well. Laguerre, he is coming across the frontier. Remember, and again, think how many of you, honest to God, forgot yesterday. Laguerre is an example of proclamation, right? Fort Oswego is one of the proclamations. He is coming across the frontier. Here's the problem. As Laguerre comes across the frontier, on the frontier of New York, there are several old forts. They're relatively small. For example, Fort Stanwix, and the next one will be Fort Oriskany. Ladies and gentlemen, what is the item you need to know about Laguerre? These forts have small groups of colonists inside, 50, 100. The question is Laguerre's job to get as quickly and as fast to Albany, or is Laguerre's job to put down and pacify all resistance? Those are two enormously different items. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are dealing with now, yes, it is hardcore military tactics. The issue is, what is Laguerre, what is the British objective? Is it to just get to Albany, or is it to defeat your enemy? Does anyone want to take a guess what would normally be the British objective? Normally the British, because the British normally believe that the enemy is your enemy and there's only so many of them. If you always defeat them and force them to retreat. Folks, what happens is Lagar comes across the frontier, he gets to little Fort Stanwix, and he makes the decision to attack. Did everybody hear what I said? It's Fort Stanwix, and there's literally 100 colonists inside. It's a fort. What do the colonists do? They barricade the doors, they lock their heads, and every so often they go, and they put their heads behind the wall, right? My point is very simple. Laguerre is going to spend weeks attacking a fort to capture 100 men. Did that fort have any strategic value to the British? Why is he attacking it? Because they are colonists who resisted the army. Does everybody understand that? Folks, if you were fighting the French, would this make sense? Because what would be inside the fort? But the French are soldiers. They're an army. They are enlisted men, correct? Every time you defeat or capture one, the French army becomes? The American army comes from where? Volunteers, out of nowhere. When Laguerre starts marching, is there an established, defined army already created? Now let's go back. Laguerre stops at Fort Stanwix. He wastes several weeks as Laguerre beats the crap out of Fort Stanwix and does capture it. Where's the problem? Before Laguerre seizes the fort, what do you suppose the colonists did? They send out horseback riders. Then those riders would go to a town. And when they get to that town, what did that town do? They would send 5 riders out to the other towns. Every single day that goes by, what is happening across the frontier? Militias, and originally they form in little towns. So if Laguerre would arrive in a town, there would be, remember Lexington? 70 guys. Is that a big issue? What happens if you give them 3 weeks? The little begin to morph together, right? And all of a sudden, where there was, remember what I kept telling you about how? The only army is whose? The only army is Washington's. Because Howe respect for what? Guess what is beginning to form in New England?
Giant militias.
What is the #1 thing militias need? If you were fighting the French, honestly, the strategy makes sense. Because does the French army get bigger if you wait? No. The French army is the French army. The English do not respect or understand the militia. Yeah, Fort Stanwix falls. Ladies and gentlemen, Fort Stanwix is not really the item for the test. Fort Stanwix, the item, is it buys time. That's it. The reason we bring up Fort Stanwix is it buys time. The next fort is the one that has a little bit more significance, and the name is called Oriskany. Ladies and gentlemen, at Fort Oriskany, what's the difference? It's not 100 colonists. It's 1,000. So the colonists are inside a fort, so they have a defensive structure, and at Oriskany, the colonists are led by Benedict Arnold. For those of you who are not familiar with that name at all, he is an important name. For those of you who are familiar with him and hate him and despise him, good for you, but please be aware, historically, you don't hate him yet. Ladies and gentlemen, at Oriskany, in very simple terms, the colonists have a very effective militia. It's a good-sized militia. They also were able to bring in an experienced commander. If Laguerre would have skipped Stanwix, this would not have happened. Folks, the big item here is Laguerre attacks Fort Stanwix. Benedict Arnold puts up a brilliant defense. The colonists have a very well-planned defense of the fort. Laguerre determines that the colonists, it is becoming too dangerous. He still has a fairly long distance to Albany. Remember, Laguerre was basically the cleanup crew, kind of, just going through the frontier. Because of the Battle of Oriskany, Laguerre feels that continuing would be too dangerous. Laguerre returns back to Fort Oswego. Ladies and gentlemen, colonists have now forced Laguerre back to Fort Oswego. The British Army has abandoned the attack from the west, and that is really the point that I'm trying to get to at the end of last hour and today. It is called Burgoyne's three-pronged attack. General Clinton is now in Philadelphia. General Laguerre, or Commander Laguerre, has returned back to he gave up. This does 2 things. Burgoyne is all by himself. Look at it here. Once Burgoyne leaves Montreal, he's absolutely in the middle of New England. He is traveling down the Hudson River to get to Albany. The other thing you want to think about is remember the soldiers that are at Oriskany. Remember the soldiers that may be the towns down here. When the colonists learn that there is no army coming here, there is no army coming here, all of the militias that had formed can now begin to descend in one area, and that will be Albany. So ladies and gentlemen, let's get to the big one, because honestly, if you look at the three prongs, this is the most important one, absolutely positively. When you look at Burgoyne's three-pronged attack, simplify. The southern prong ends in Brandywine. The western prong ends in Oriskany. Burgoyne's prong, which would be the northern prong, this is the big one. Here comes Burgoyne. He comes down Lake Champlain, and once again, we will have English stupidity. I'm sorry, but it is the truth. When John Burgoyne gets to the bottom of Lake Champlain, what does he find along the Hudson River? Fort Ticonderoga. Remember that? The fort that was captured. Once again, John Burgoyne is going to be confronted with a question. Does he ignore it? Does he literally skip around it? Does he keep moving? Or does he basically stop and siege it? Fort Ticonderoga is a much larger, it is a much stronger fort. The only way you're going to be able to capture it is you're going to have to blow the walls apart. It will take weeks. The colonists do not have a large enough army to really fight him back, but they can easily hide behind the walls and be a pain. Again, if Burgoyne continues to move, it's very much, for those of you who have ever heard of World War II, Adolf, he uses what is, in Blitzkrieg, it is known as lightning war. You attack your enemy and you hit, 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 hit. You never let your enemy do what? Regroup, retaliate. That's where John Burgoyne is going to make the same mistake to Lagarde. He gets to Ticonderoga, and the British are going to follow what would be typical English format. They are going to siege the fort. Ladies and gentlemen, if you bring up Ticonderoga here, the key point is not the Battle of Ticonderoga, it is time. Ladies and gentlemen, the British Army continues to make the same fatal mistake. Because, and again, you guys need to get used to saying it. Why is the time such a big deal? Militias. Flat out, that is the answer. Where there were no armies, there are going to become armies. Next item. At Ticonderoga, there are two things you might want to identify. One, they sent outriders to warn the towns. We've talked about that before. So as the British attack Ticonderoga, the colonists begin to notify. Number two, the colonists are going to do something else. The colonists aren't stupid. If the British Army has come from Montreal down to Ticonderoga, what logically, if you look at the map, would appear to be the next location? Albany, right? Guess what? There is only one primary roadway between Ticonderoga and Albany. It's kind of an old Indian trail. Number two, a group of colonists were let out of Ticonderoga. As the British begin the attack, they begin to implement what is called a delay tactic. A delay tactic is a splendidly simple, marvelous military tactic that any one of you, if we were ever forced into some sort of conflict, could do. In the Revolution, it is referred to as falling trees. In the most basic terms, a group of colonists basically make their way down the road, and literally what they do is they take their axes and they chop trees down. The trees, of course, fall down, the branches intertwine, and they just keep doing that. Every time they get to a bridge or anything of that nature, they burn it or destroy it. As the British eventually beat Fort Ticonderoga, they get to the road. Imagine, you guys all do the mile in gym class, right? If an army is marching all day, they should be able to move 10, 15, 20 miles a day, right? The British Army is going to come to the roads and they're covered with trees. For those of you who have ever gone out splitting wood, it doesn't take much to chop a tree down, but once the tree has fallen down, and some of these are probably 80, 90-year-old oak trees, in order to clear the road, because the British are bringing wagons. Remember, John Burgoyne is going to be stationed in Albany. He has cannons, he has supply wagons. In fact, some of the men brought their wives and girlfriends. It was like a little caravan. They need to clear the road. Ladies and gentlemen, John Burgoyne will literally be slowed down to about a mile a day. So please understand, the attack on Ticonderoga, the delay tactic are unbelievably effective. So here's where we're at. The British Army is making their way towards Albany. The other two armies are not coming. One other item you need to think about. Folks, John Burgoyne was supposed to arrive in Albany by the 1st of July. He will not arrive in Albany or that area until October. He's months behind. Can anyone identify what other problem is that going to create? Folks need to eat. I mean, what about water? What about, supplies? What about Band-Aids? Folks, they are running 2 months or more behind. So you have a British army that all day long is basically working, and all of a sudden Burgoyne has to put his army on half rations. They're eating less food. The British army was running into trouble. Ladies and gentlemen, the Continental Army will not go to the big battle. The big battle will be made up of militia. Here we go. Let's try to get to where everybody needs to be. Folks, Burgoyne's army is getting behind. They were getting tired. They were running out of supplies. The big battle is at a place called Saratoga. This is the battle. When you look at Burgoyne's three-pronged attack, Brandywine is cute, or Oriskany is cute, they're not the ones that matter. The big battle, and if you need to have Cleveland say it that way, the big battle is the Battle of Saratoga. Ladies and gentlemen, Saratoga is a small town, 15 miles north of Albany. Just before Albany, the colonists are going to set up a defensive structure. They are going to set up sort of a battle plan. They basically block off the road. They lay out their men, and this is where the colonists are going to prepare for the major battle. And technically speaking, when we get to the Battle of Saratoga, there is going to, at least in the future, be some confusion. The confusion about the Battle of Saratoga is, of course, who gets the credit. And under technical terms, the highest ranking American soldier was Horatio Gates. So when you look at the Battle of Saratoga, one argument is the commander is Horatio Gates. The problem is, according to most accounts, the man who set up the defense, the man who placed the soldiers, the man who was on the field every day, who organized it, was Benedict Arnold. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to once again state, this is the single most important decisive battle for changing the revolution. According to most documented accounts, the man who is probably most responsible for the future victory is Benedict Arnold. Horatio Gates will steal a lot of the credit. Hint, 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 hint. That is going to create some tension. There's the road. Albany is here. The basic defense is Benedict Arnold created what kind of looks like a bowl. His main army is here, and then he put two armies kind of out on the flanks, and they were kind of angled. Folks, this strategy will be used by generals in World War II and other battles, because as your enemy comes, you force them into a situation where they're being surrounded from three sides. The British Army is in a desperate situation because they're low on equipment, their men are exhausted, and they are still miles from Albany. Why does Burgoyne not turn around and head back? Because it was his plan. He was the one being assigned to Albany. He was the one that, of course, had the most, it was his new command post. So, ladies and gentlemen, as the battle begins, John Burgoyne has three options. One, turn and leave. Two, stand and fight. Or three, try to basically make a run for it and get to Albany. John Burgoyne is operating under the idea that somehow or another, General Howe must not know. Burgoyne firmly believes that Albany must be under English control. What Burgoyne is going to try to do is he is going to try a direct assault. He is going to try to break a hole. He literally ordered his men to leave all the wagons and big supplies, and they were literally going to make a mad dash run to Albany. Problem: the lines don't break. Two sides collapse. It looks identical to the Battle of Bulge in World War II. So the two sides collapse in, and ladies and gentlemen, what is the big end result? On October 17, 1777, John Burgoyne, a very accomplished, very experienced, very well-known British general, is captured, along with 5,700 men. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first major, decisive, no doubt about it. This is not a guerrilla tactic. This is not a fluky battle. This is a decisive standing line formation, no doubt about it. John Burgoyne's entire army is eliminated. Militarily, it defends Albany. The big point is you literally captured, it proved the militias can fight. I want to be very, very clear. You are not done. You are not done with the Battle of Saratoga. Folks, the big deal, great, we won, we got confidence back. That's not it. It is that will lead to the next item. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the Battle of Saratoga that finally convinces Louis XVI that the colonists are serious, that the colonists have a legitimate chance, and it is after the Battle of Saratoga that Louis XVI will go into serious negotiations. Benjamin Franklin, Arthur Lee, and Silas Deane. So notice, Benjamin Franklin will become the lead negotiator. They begin to negotiate a deal to create a French alliance. The idea is to basically bring the French into the war. The alliance will simply be called the Treaty of Alliance of 1778. Please notice we do not actually sign it until 1778. What is the single biggest, most important thing I want you to emphasize? When you talk about the three-pronged attack, the Battle of Saratoga is the main item. When you talk about Saratoga, what makes it so unbelievably important is this is what creates the French alliance. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be clear. By the end of the Revolution, bless you, soldiers in America, then American. Do not underestimate it. The Treaty of Alliance of 1778 is an agreement with the French. The French agree to support the American independence. The French agree that this is to make America an independent country. The French accept that this is not to make it a French colony. If we look at what is the big deal with the Treaty of Alliance, folks, what we want to look at is what is the benefit. By the French joining the war, the United States is going to gain an army. Remember what I said, a huge amount of men. We are going to gain French trade and supplies. We are going to gain the French Navy, the second largest navy in the world. And the one that I think people have the most trouble with is when the French signed the Treaty of Alliance, it also creates what is called legitimacy. Up until this moment, countries were terrified. They would love to support America, trade, take advantage, buy tobacco, but they did not want to upset the English. Once France signed this, other countries, smaller countries, were more willing to help America because they could hide behind the French. They could use, well, France is doing it too. So please be aware. The Treaty of Alliance basically turns this from America versus England to France joins in. Next item that I say, I like the next item. Ladies and gentlemen, in 1778. In 1778, the United States will sign the Treaty of Alliance, will become friends with the French. And here's the item that I find so fascinating and interesting. In 1778, Lord North, the new Prime Minister during the war, convinces the English Parliament to revoke all taxes. Sugar, stamp, township, declaratory, all of it. He also sends a promise to the 13 counties that England will never pass taxation on the 13 counties again. Ladies and gentlemen, the problem with this document is the English Parliament whined, they complained, they delayed, they stalled. Ladies and gentlemen, Lord North offered the 13 colonies everything they ever wanted. They could have remained English, they would have had English protection, but they would have not had to been under the burden of taxation. They would have been able to freeload off the English forever. What happens? The English Parliament complains. Let's be simple. Does anyone know why Lord North wanted to do this? Folks, in the grand scheme of things, were the 13 American colonies really that significant to England? Maybe Virginia and the Carolinas. For the most part, the 13 American colonies were a pain. But what is the other issue? Ladies and gentlemen, what if the American Revolution is not a fluke? What if in Australia and islands in the West Indies, places that produce sugar, places that produce cotton, What if all of those other counties decide that America is right and they don't need a monarch and they all begin to revolt? Ladies and gentlemen, Lord North is far more afraid of what precedent, what kind of a pain in the butt would this be if they constantly have to put out these little brush fires, and now you got the worthless French helping. This is damage control. And please understand, I know we're American and we're arrogant. We have the belief that the 13 counties were we were a pain in the butt. With the exception of Virginia and the Carolinas, we didn't do what we were supposed to, did we? No. Massachusetts, New England was worthless.